Chroma, the God King of weapon slingers. Chroma has earned this title through all frames in the game over many years, serving as one of, if not the best of the weapon slinger frames that this game has ever seen. However, though he is high weapon damage, he does have a decent amount of other things that I feel like a lot of people forget about. He has some team buffing, a whole lot of tankiness, and even a little bit of CC capabilities. Chroma is one of those frames that everyone looks at as just a weapon slinger, and though that may be what he is best at, today I hope to enlighten some players as to his capabilities in supporting, and maybe even some alternative playstyles that he proposes for you and your team. Chroma's passive allows for a triple jump as he sprouts wings to allow for an additional jump. Thematically, I love this as Chroma is a dragon slayer that wears a dragon skin over his own, so gaining an additional jump due to that I think is pretty neat. Chroma's first ability is Spectral Scream, and also how he chooses elements to augment his 1, 2, and 4 abilities. By tapping this key, he cycles between Toxin, Heat, Cold, and Electricity. Upon holding the key down, he breathes whatever element he has picked, dealing damage of that element and applying the status of that element to enemies hit. This is the real only form of CC he has outside of random shockwaves sent out from his 4, whereas the cold, electricity, and heat active, they will apply those status and subsequently those procs. So heat will make enemies kind of flail around, cold will slow them, and electricity will shock them. These procs are forms of soft CC, but that's still a form of CC nonetheless. Chroma's second ability is Elemental Ward, which has a slightly less than accurate description. It says upon using it, it imbues allies with defensive abilities, and granted some of these are defensive, but a majority of them are offensive and buffs to damage and the sort. Personally, I tend to actually cycle around depending on what is needed because different situations require different elements, and it's actually beneficial to swap around for what you and your team may need. Heat offers health, a DPS aura, and 10% status chance, which is locked at 10% unlike his other elements. Electricity grants shield capacity, status chance, damage multiplier, and has a slightly decreased radius since it gives a lot of buffs that are fairly potent. Toxin gives holster speed, reload speed, and a lot of status chance, and Cold grants you armor, a damage multiplier, and status chance. Clearly you're seeing a theme here. The frame all about elements grants you status chance, who would have guessed? The thing is that they are all different amounts, as Toxin grants you the most but doesn't give you great buffs in other departments, Heat grants you the least but gives you max HP, giving you some really nice survivability, and Cold gives you an in-between, granting armor for slight survivability and a damage multiplier granting some damage but not as much of a damage multiplier as Electricity has. Honestly, this is one of those abilities that you have to feel for yourself to see what works for what you like. Like I said, I hot swap between them and try and get what I can for my team, but if you're a solo player, that's a little different. Chroma's 3 is Vex Armor, granting you and your allies armor when your shields are hit, and weapon damage when your health is hit. So sometimes it's actually beneficial to eat a little bit of shit in a mission to buff you and your team. Now be aware, this ability does drop off if you let its buff fall off. And when I say it falls off, it just disappears. I recommend keeping an eye on this, and an easy way to remember it is cast your Elemental Ward first, so that when that buff goes away, you know you have to cast Vex Armor soon or you'll lose that too. The two share the same amount of duration down to the millisecond, so a good way to do it is cast your Elemental Ward, wait a second or two, then cast your Vex Armor. And finally, we have Effigy. This ability is designed to be Chroma's signature ability, and I think thematically they have nailed it, but as far as practicality goes, I think that they could do a couple things different. You shed your skin, putting an effigy of a dragon onto the battlefield that breeds elemental damage to enemies. Every now and then it will do a knockback CC, and that's about it for what the dragon does. Shedding this skin, however, gives you a credit multiplier, extra credit drop chance, a speed increase for you and your allies, and an armor reduction for yourself. I would like to take a second to talk about threat in this game, as threat is a term used as to how an enemy chooses a target. Think of it this way. You have 50 threat just existing. Defense Terminal has 150 threat by existing, which is why enemies will walk past you to hit the terminal. Chroma's Effigy has a slightly higher threat than yours, figure it around 100 in this example. Enemies will attack it first until you get too close to them. In testing, it seems about 6 meters before enemies realize who the real threat is, so do with that what you will. Chroma has been around for a long time. That being said, he has 4 augments at his disposal, one for each of his abilities, those being Afterburn, Everlasting Ward, Vexing Retaliation, and Guided Effigy. Afterburn says, upon deactivation of his 1, Chroma will launch an elemental ball, dealing 100 damage for each second this ability was active, up to a maximum of 500. Now, there's a weird symbol on this mod. That's new to the channel, so I'll go over it this once, and then I'll call it a day and just call it a dual mod in the future. This means that it can be used in PvP, or Conclave, as it's called in Warframe. With that, the augment is balanced around PvP and PvE, which means, as you can see, it's a little lackluster as far as the PvE scene goes. However, if you're someone that PvPs with Chroma, give it a shot and let me know in the comments how it feels, as I actually don't PvP that much anymore, and when I did, I mainly used Rhino. Everlasting Ward makes it so allies can leave Chroma's radius and maintain the buff that he had for as long as he has it, meaning you don't have to glue yourself to your team for them to be buffed, which is nice, but I personally don't run it. It's a good augment, and if you can fit it in your build, I do recommend it. The issue for me is that it is in a syndicate that I don't own, and everyone who I've asked isn't in that syndicate either. Vexing Retaliation says, after taking 150 damage, you will emit a 9-meter burst. Shield damage will cause puncture procs on enemies hit, and health hit will cause blast procs, giving Chroma some survivability, but he doesn't really need it, and to be honest, I think this is the worst augment that he has, due to the fact that when you're getting hit, oftentimes you're trying to build up Vex armor, so stunning enemies or decreasing their DPS in any way just slows that ramp and gives your allies more time to kill them before they can actually help you ramp. Lastly, Guiding Effigy says, cast and hold to make the effigy move to a point that you're aiming at, dealing 2,000 damage per second to enemies that are in the path, and it does that little roar stun on landing nearby enemies. This is a great augment for some quick CC and repositioning your effigy, but once again, I don't use this augment, so I sleep. Now for the build. I put a fair bit of focus into duration and range, as supporting your team is always a good benefit, but if you're a solo player, you can sacrifice the range since you're not going to be buffing anyone, and give yourself some more power strength or duration. Efficiency is kind of a dump stat on him, as getting energy back isn't that hard with Xeneric or energy pizzas, so you can kind of skip on it a bit, but I still run Streamline just to make it so my costs aren't horrendous. Chroma, as stated, is the king of weapon slinging, buffing his allies and his weapons to insane degrees and making enemies shit themselves upon him loading into a mission. Even in Steel Path, he holds it down really well. However, if Chroma is king of weapon slinging, then who's the queen? Thank you all for coming, and I hope to see you all in the next video.